Psychoanalysis, the movement of inertia. Namaste. Ever since Freud conceptualized the controversial death instinct, inertia has had a strange life in psychoanalysis. Conversation today is to comprehend in scope and perhaps depth the extensive movement of inertia in psychic life. Guide in conversation is Dr. Himanshu Vede. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, do we start with the life of inertia in psychoanalysis?
It's a very interesting and enigmatic life that the concept of inertia had in psychoanalysis. It started with Freud. Later, Freud encountered patients coming from the fronts of Second World War. And these patients kept repeating the traumatic scenes they had undergone, experiences they had undergone. Initially, Freud thought this was an attempt at mastery, that every time you go to the past and recall the past and try to relive it, you advance slightly on the path of healing. That was his original idea, that this is an attempt at mastery, and repetition of that traumatic experience is a way to healing and mastery, one step at a time. Later on, he realized that this was not true. In many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, patients derived a unique kind of pleasure by recalling those traumatic experiences. And this led him to the idea of masochism. The idea of masochism here is very different from the original idea of masochism. The original idea was sadism is primary and masochism is a secondary derivative of sadism, meaning the pleasure is in inflicting pain upon the other, which is sadism. But if I do not find an other on whom I can practice this because of reality or morality, then what I do is I get this pleasure by identification. So I become the object of sadism for the other. I invite pain. I invite somebody to give me pain, and by identifying with him, I satisfy my sadism. So masochism was secondary, a derivative of the sadistic impulse. Here, what Freud was encountering was something different. Here, masochism came out to be as primary as sadism, and some people will go to the extent of saying even more primary than sadism. Some people will say now you have sadism and masochism equal in terms of their elemental nature. And some will go to the extent of reversing the earlier hierarchy and say masochism now is primary and sadism is secondary. That sadism is a inverted way of living out one's masochism. That will be one extreme. And so one extreme will be to inverse the original hierarchy. That sadism was primary, masochism was secondary. Now masochism is primary, sadism is secondary. But most people will say, let us come to a in-between thing that both are equally primary. But this led to a lot of controversies. The first controversy was many people believed that the two fundamental drives of pleasure and aggression were enough to describe the psychic system, and there was no need to bring in this enigmatic and almost a mystical kind of element into theory of psychoanalysis, because this was leading to the concept of the death instinct slowly. And what happened was, the first controversy here was that if masochism was primary, then we will have to redefine the word pleasure. Because till now we said pleasure and pain are two distinct entities, and the drive of the psyche is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And very early in Freud's career, Freud's journey, Freud had come across this thing, and he made a very famous statement. He said about suffering, psychic suffering, he said, men will do anything not to let go of his misery. That people were holding
Mm.
to their pathologies. They were not letting go. The defenses were so strong that Freud used to say man will do anything but to let go of his misery. And the idea there was, how would then Freud reconcile the pleasure maximization principle with this phenomena he saw in the patients? So Freud explained it by saying that the suffering that we see, because of which we call it a disorder, is conscious. But secretly in the unconscious, there is far more pleasure than the conscious suffering. So
Okay.
overall, the maintenance of pathology is also pleasure positive. That the unconscious pleasure probably exceeds the conscious suffering. And therefore, it's an overall, if you take the whole mathematics of the psyche, it's overall a pleasure positive phenomenon. So that way he could explain away uh, the holding on to pain, the holding on to suffering by the idea of the unconscious pleasure. And which was true. It is true that there is a lot of unconscious pleasure, even in suffering that we hold on. It is true in many cases. But here, the moment you say that there is pleasure in pure suffering, that masochism, even if you say masochism is a inverted sadism, you can still explain it by the pleasure principle. That there is more unconscious pleasure than there is conscious suffering. And therefore, masochism also is in one sense pleasure positive. But the moment you say it's only pain and you like that pain per se, and there is no compensating pleasure in any other corner of the psyche to more than offset this pain, but you like the pain into itself, that creates a very different definition of pleasure. Because then we'll have to define pleasure in a way to say there is ordinary pleasure and there are what I call the twisted pleasures or strange pleasures. We
Or
are
can we say that one is just the conscious pleasure and other is purely unconscious pleasure?
uh, we can and we may not, because part of masochism can also be conscious.
No, for those, it is very much obvious and visible. A part of it is conscious. For those which are like twisted ones, it is purely unconscious, totally suppressed. The pleasure.
Uh, Let us say somebody is practicing BDSM,
Mm.
and let us say we don't have a case of a inverted sadism but pure masochism. Then in that case, the man will be experiencing it consciously also.
The experience is conscious, which is purely because it's very biological, physiological in nature. The pain is for real. That is very biological pain. But still taking it up is because the unconscious is totally suppressed and it is getting the pleasure.
Yeah, so what we have is we will have a conscious masochistic pleasure and we will have an unconscious masochistic pleasure. And
Hmm.
both of them, by normal consideration, are twisted pleasures. They don't
True.
feel healthy to a normal person.
Right.
So this leads to a reconceptualization of the word pleasure, that we'll have to define something like a regular pleasure or a ordinary pleasure and a twisted pleasure or a strange pleasure. And this was the first step towards the death instinct, because Freud's concept of death instinct started from here, that there can be a pleasure in giving pain to oneself, and the next step was there can be a pleasure in self-destruction, and there can be a tendency of self-destruction. And then came the idea of why this self-destruction. And the idea was that one has a unconscious drive to go back to that state of inertia from where one has come. And it is like pure inertia. So there Freud goes philosophical to say that from matter came life, from life came mind, and there is a call to go back to the origin. That the moment you have from matter, life comes. The life is called back by matter to seize itself and get back into that original state of inertia. So just as there is a force which brought life out of inert matter.
Yes.
After coming out, there is still a force which calls back to the original state. And after that, when mind comes out of life, the same kind of thing happens, that there is an upward evolutionary force because of which mind comes out of life, but there is an involutionary force also which is bringing it back, which tells the mind to cease its operations and go back to the state of life. And to the state of life, it tells to go back to the state of inertia. So this inertia then became a component of Freud's death instinct. So we had masochism, we had inertia, and we had repetition. That Freud says that whatever state you are in, there is a tendency in the system to keep repeating the same state over and over again. Sri Aurobindo calls it the physical mind, that part of the psyche which repeats itself over and over again.
Is the physical mind?
Yeah, he calls it physical mind because his idea of model of the mind is physical mind, vital mind, the mind, and super mind. And below the physical mind will be the subliminal range of consciousness, which will have the subconscient and the inconscient. So his model of the mind is that way.
Okay.
So he puts this word physical mind, which keeps repeating itself. Like if you listen to a song 4 or 5 times and you put it off, then for 2 or 3 days, a part of the mind keeps repeating it over and over again. So that in his model of the mind will be the physical mind.
Mm.
Now the purpose is to maintain stability, to keep repeating whatever is there. So Freud's idea of death instinct started from there, that one, there is a movement to go ahead, evolutionary movement. Second, there is an involutionary movement to go back to the origins from where we came. And there is a stabilizing movement of repetition to stabilize where we have come. And this stabilizing movement is actually a very fungible currency, it's a very modular element that it can work at the level of the mind, it can work at the level of life, it can work at the level of matter. And perhaps some component of it's there at all the 3 levels. So that's how Freud started conceptualizing the idea of death instinct. So first time we see death instinct is in Freud, the later Freud, where he started from masochism, then went to repetition of masochism. That in masochism we also see repetition. So he saw masochism, he saw repetition, and then he saw a tendency to go back to inertia. And all the three he put together into death instinct. And a corollary of that was to destroy oneself, to go back to the state of inertia. And outer corollary was to destroy in the outer world all that is the creation of the life and the mind, to bring back everything to a state of inertia. So the conceptualization of death instinct was also in aggressive terms of destruction of self and destruction of the other. So this is how it started off with Freud, and then it was taken up by Klein, because Klein talked about death instinct very clearly, and she said that what we call aggression, much of that is not independent aggression, but a deflection of death instinct, meaning there is something called a pure death instinct which is coming towards us, and we have to deflect it on somebody to save ourselves. And that we do by 2 ways. One, by deflecting it onto some person in the outer world, or we create a psychological object in the inner world and deflect it towards it. So in the inner world, we have an object towards whom aggression is targeted, directed. And that's the way we save ourselves from the death instinct. So she was not a proponent, but she was very accepting of the concept of death instinct. You were saying something, I think. You were about to say something? Hello?
So I had lost your voice in between.
Were you about to say something?
No, I was asking you if both of us have having connection issue.
So then we see after Klein, we see it in terms of Andre Green. Andre Green did a lot of work on death instinct. So that is the journey that we see three important theories, Freud, Klein, and Andre Green, who did a lot of work on death instinct. And the conceptualization has developed to some extent of death instinct. And now a general philosophical acceptance that if everything constructive, creative, and pleasurable is the result of life instinct, then all that is opposite of it, which is related to aging, destruction, atrophy, erosion, indulgence, inertia, all those are functions of another instinct, counterpart of the life instinct called the death instinct. Many people will philosophically agree, though not put it into a theoretical framework and list of it into practice. So that is how we see death instinct in
So
psychoanalysis.
I have a question here. So what it would be for the layman to understand? Is it life forces versus death, life instinct versus death instinct, or it is the spectrum which has two polarity? One is that of a life instinct, and one that is of the death instinct. Are they separate entity, or they are just the two poles apart on the same spectrum?
It is more like two separate entities.
In all the three philosophy and philosophical and psychological explanation of Freud, Klein, and Andre Green, it's the same way.
Generally, yeah, because the philosophical idea there is that in the reality that we encounter, we don't see equilibriums, and equilibriums are very important in all systems. Equilibriums do not be eternally static. You may have temporal equilibrium.
Dynamic, yeah.
Those temporal equilibriums after some time undergo a change and form a new equilibrium. And that is another temporal equilibrium, and it can go on. So what we see is equilibrium is very essential to systems, particularly biological and psychological systems. And we see equilibriums established not by virtue of a self-regulating intelligent single force, but we see equilibriums being established because of two intelligent opposing forces, which are informed by some intelligence either inside them or from outside them. And they come together and establish an equilibrium. It's like, let's say, heartbeat. So there'll be two hormones, one which increases the heartbeat, second which reduces, and the brain will control the flow of the two and maintain heartbeat in a range. So the equilibrium will be established by two opposing hormones, not by one single self-intelligent hormone. So that is by and large the nature of equilibrium that we see in living systems, that it is by two opposing forces. So most people will see that the psyche is an extension of all those systems, and therefore it is the equilibriums are achieved by two opposing forces, the life force and the death force. Now, in effect, if you see that when the two of them come together, then what happens? Then we will have the result almost like having it on the equilibrium of a single life force. The net outcome will be that.
Yes.
So that is how the conceptualization at present is.
And is that Jung's dark shadow part has something to do with this death instinct, or that's totally a different concept?
He did not put it that way, but if we take death instinct to Jung, then all that is destructive, all that is obstructive, all that is non-cooperative to individuation, all that is firing the archetypes or not allowing deactivation of archetypes according to the program of life, all of that will be the outcome of death instinct. If we apply the two-force model to the Jung's model.
Jungian concept.
So in that sense, what you're saying is true. The shadow will have a large component of creations of the death instinct, just as it will have some components which the life instincts breaking free from morality did then got repressed.
When we see in pathology, where this inertia comes into role play, can we see inertia vividly living itself out?
Yeah. So when we apply the two-force model to, say, DSM, so there are various ways of applying Freudian concepts. One is to just apply the classical concepts and the structural model and the psychosexual stages of development. So we have one way to do it is if you use early Freud and apply it to DSM,
Mm.
use component instincts, you will use the structural model and you will use the psychosexual development. And some phenomena which Freud pointed out for some particular sicknesses, like one he pointed out for depression, one he pointed out for homosexual, sorry, uh, delusion of persecution. So if you put all this together, you will have a causality uh, container, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
that you will have a basket of causality elements, and they will create the whole of DSM. But if you apply Freud's later Freud to DSM, you will be applying the two force model. And when you do that, you will see death instinct or death drive, thanatos, largely acting in addiction, many forms of addiction which are self-destructive, which want the person to seize everything and go back to the state of inertia, destruction of self, destruction of the other. Second, in depression, especially when somebody is coming out of it, like you have been depressed and you just come out of it and you are feeling good, and you feel like a loss of an anchor. That when you were very sad, you felt anchored. There was like
Mm.
very deep and dense, dark foundation.
State.
And now you are like, you are a piece of light which has been come out of that, but you are shred out of a massive immensity of which you were a part. And now you feel a very different kind of a aloneness, loneliness, alienation, and insecurity. And there is a call to go back to that state, which perpetuates depression. So there we see death instinct. We can see it in catatonia, not necessarily in every catatonia, but in some forms of catatonia we can see. We can see it in secretly in some forms of what I call happy schizophrenia with
Mm.
negative features, where somebody has regressed to primary narcissism, and in that secretly one may have a component of regressing to the inertia, but it's completely soaked in bliss, so we don't make it out actually. And uh, in normal life, you can just see it in what we call laziness or taking rest, the pleasure of doing nothing. That there is a pleasure of doing nothing and there is a pain of doing something. And every time we have to do something, we have to say, we have to almost like extract ourselves out of that doing nothing matrix in a very painful way and then start doing something. It can be just like you give somebody to read 500 pages and it's very dense, and the pain the mind doesn't want to take.
Mm.
Because thinking in one sense is painful, especially learning related thinking. It's painful.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy oriented thinking is a different thing. But when you learn something new, the thinking is painful. When you do something new, the doing is painful. And there is a lure not to do anything and go back to the state of inertia. So there also we see the lure, the seduction of inertia, and it can easily become the addiction of inertia. So we see that in normal language also. If you go to low income communities, you will see many people just doing nothing. Obviously, because they don't have enough incentives to do something which can overcome the incentive of inertia.
But inside deep unconscious, there is more of this aspect being in active state.
So one of the very good elements of greed is a very good antidote to inertia. Societies keep
Eventually, the greed takes you to the place where you want to be inert again, because you want to have everything so that you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, but in the process, you keep doing things all your life. Right? And
Right.
after some time, after attaining it, after enjoying for it for some time, the greed reignites again.
Does that mean for people who are overactive, hyperactive, they have anxiety and fear of inertia? There are many people who cannot sit idle. They just have to get on go all the time.
So there will be very few who will be doing it out of reaction to inertia. Most
Okay.
of them have many other reasons. For example, if they do nothing, they will encounter the pathological material inside, which they don't want to encounter.
If we keep the escapism and everything aside, There are many individuals who just they cannot sit with the void because they see it as a void, the inertia as a void.
And this is like the opposite state of spiritual enlightenment. So when you attain the spiritual enlightenment and you are in bliss, you don't want to do anything. Similarly, here there is a addiction of inertia and you don't want to do anything. So
Mm.
it's like there is pure tamas, there is rajas, sattva, and the enlightened state. So enlightened state is the one extreme, and the state of inertia is the second extreme. And in between is the entire range of all activities. So that is
Also, in between, you use the word regressing to inertia. So, if we see the psychosexual developmental stages, where exactly this inertial state is it in the womb, the inertia before the life begins, and in Kleinian space, where it is?
uh, in the womb, there are states of inertia and there are states of primary narcissism, and both are actually intertwined.
Hmm.
And the inertia component of it is more difficult to see than the component of oceanic feeling of primary narcissism.
Okay.
But there will be microphases of the state of inertia in the womb. Outside in the phase of primary narcissism, I think there will be states of primary narcissism, there will be states of trying to relate to objects, and there will be states of inertia. But largely it will be primary narcissism, and in that there will be hidden states of inertia.
Inertia.
Now, coming to what was the question of Klein?
My question was where exactly we can see this inertia? Because when you say we regress to inertia, where is that state in the life stages, in the psychosexual developmental stages? Is it before Oedipus, pre Oedipus? Is it in the oral state, say before? Is there any stage there?
Ah, that's a good question. It is not a stage, but it is a state to which you enter in every stage. And
Okay.
if you don't enter, there is a possibility of entering.
So this is not the inertia due to bliss.
No, because this is like you can visualize a continuum of movement and inertia.
Hmm.
Now, all the psychosexual stages essentially are stages of movement. So you can think of it in terms of stability and dynamism. And all the psychosexual stages are eventful stages of dynamism.
Dynamic. Yes.
Even if they are happening, there can be states where there is a call to give it all up and go back to the state of inertia. Why do all this hassle? Why take all this trouble? It is so
That in that case, it is even pre superego, id, and ego. It's just before id. Somewhere where id is being formed, inertia is also there with primary
it's
narcissism.
pre the structural components of the psyche. So even before the id, ego, superego are there, the moment life comes into existence in the womb, the action of inertia will start. Because we are looking here at more fundamental things than even life. We are looking at, if
What?
you the very root of it, we are
Yeah.
looking at inertia and dynamism.
In elemental forms.
I'll just give an example to illustrate this. What is pure inertia? Mother, who was with Sri Aurobindo, she was explaining uh, the concept of the physical mind, and in that came the concept of physical inconscient. So, Sri Aurobindo's idea was of evolution and involution.
Hmm.
There is initially pure consciousness descends into pure inconscience.
Hmm.
The opposite of pure consciousness is pure inconscient. And from there, slowly everything arises. So the first thing that arises out of pure inconscience is matter.
Okay.
So matter compared to the pure inconscience is many times dynamic. So mother used to say that if when you experience pure inertia, a stone will look to you like a universe of dynamism.
Hmm.
So you can think if the stone looks inert to you, multiply it by million times the inertia of the stone, and you will have pure inertia. So what you have is the idea there is pure consciousness descending into pure inertia,
Descending down.
then in the
Hmm.
evolutionary process, slowly coming back to pure consciousness. And
Consciousness.
cycles go on. So pure consciousness becomes pure inertia, then matter comes, then life comes, then mind comes, then higher forms of mind comes, and then slowly you reach the pure consciousness.
I think that is very much similar to quantum physics. May if we can explain this thing that there is a state where there's inertia or inert atoms at they're saturated. There is no valency created, and there's inert, and then something happens, and there is some shift, and again they get into the disequilibrium, and then there's something like that.
Yeah, so in quantum physics, the concept of inertia is used in the concept of mass. So when you go deeper and you ask the question, what gives mass to the mass? And what do you call a mass and what do you call matter? When you go deeper into these questions, then you will encounter the concept of inertia. Even now, if you go to you
Mm,
go
mm.
deeper into the concept of mass and the concept of matter, you will encounter the concept of inertia.
Yes, yes.
So the concept of inertia actually is trans psychology. It is very much at the root of one of the ununderstood fundamental elements in physics. That at the root, like if you put a question, what is mass? What is inertia?
Mm,
What is dynamism? What is probability at its roots? Not the
mm.
that we all know. You toss
Yes,
a coin and you get head and tail, and you toss three coins and three heads and one tail and all sorts of things. But we are looking at it, okay, why should probability exist in the first place?
first place.
Why should these things happen? So when you go into that kind of fundamental thinking, obviously it goes beyond science at the moment. You're into philosophy of science. But inertia is a very important concept there in the philosophy of science. When you start questioning what is mass, what is dynamism, what is inertia. So it's
Matters.
yeah. So I was talking about the DSM manifestation. So we see it in addiction, we see it in depression, some forms of addiction, some forms of depression, some forms of catatonia, some forms of what I call happy schizophrenia with negative features. Uh, we see it in some forms of self-destruction, in some cases of borderline, and we see it in some forms of schizoid, where it's active along with other things, not that singularly active, but active along with other things. And we see it in depression, as I said, and we see it also in some forms of uh, antisocial personalities, where they want to have everything without doing anything. It's a very good combination of narcissism and inertia.
So further, it brings us to controversial conceptualization of pure effect, or effect always directed towards an object. How do we see that in inertia?
Uh, this is a very good question, a difficult question. Let me start by saying something about pure affect and pure state,
Hmm.
because the Freudians and the Kleinians are at loggerheads on this. Kleinians don't believe that you can have an object-free state like primary narcissism. They always believe that you always have thoughts and feelings. All the psychic activities presuppose an object. It's always towards an object that the cognition or affect is directed. So if you have sadness, it is related to something. If you have anger, it is towards somebody, maybe others or maybe us. It is towards some object in the mind. You cannot have a emotion without a target. That if you have sadness, this sadness related to someone, related to some event, which means object in the mind. The memory of that event, the representation of that person is an object in the mind. So it is towards an object that feelings flow. Feelings cannot flow towards nothing. They are in fact generated because of interaction with an object.
Right.
So when you say feelings are generated because of interaction with an object, maybe in the real world or maybe in the fantasy world. So feelings are outcome. Feelings presuppose that initially you had some interaction with an object, and because of which the feelings were generated.
Because that is how the world has played out for all of us. But if we see in many of the saints, even the objects are dissolved, everything is still something is being generated.
So there are two parts of it. One is the normal understanding is that what cognitive behavioral therapy says, that you have thought, feeling, and action.
Mm.
That and all the three are related to some object. You cannot have an object-free thought, an object-free feeling, or an object-free action. So the first understanding is that we have the feelings themselves are outcomes of interaction with an object. And the thoughts also are outcomes of interaction with an object. That is one way of looking at it.
Well, that's very debatable because what I feel, feelings are there. Understanding of feeling is a response to. There is a dyad there to understand that feeling, that for what it is. There is something being generated.
So the idea there is that in the generation process, once it is generated, we reflect upon it. Okay, how it is generated, was it right or wrong? Is it in
No,
our
even not that. Just a realization that this is coming from some understanding. But even if there is no understanding, if there is a person who is mentally retarded, they also generate a lot of feelings, which
correct?
is irrespective of the object outside.
So we have three opinions here. One is that the psychic activity is an outcome of interaction with an object. The second is that psychic activity is independent. It searches for an object, but it always searches for an object. It cannot remain independent by itself for a long time. The mind is such an instrument that will generate some object in the internal world to find a screen for that force to be attached. So let us say, yeah,
Yeah, it takes me to the analogy of the particle. When not being observed, it behaves in a different way. When observed, it behaves like a wave. So it is something to do with the observer. I don't know. Somewhere in this discussion, I
only
feel that
it will have, if you are in the observer state while the feelings are being generated,
yeah.
change that algorithm. That is what we do when we say we talk about the observing ego and the participating ego.
Yes, yes.
That's the whole technique by which mindfulness works. And that's the whole technique by which, not the whole technique, but a very important part of the psychoanalytic technique of strengthening the observing ego to observe the generation of affect. So the second part is that the cognitive and the affective activity finds an object
Hmm.
in a rapid fire millisecond kind of thing. So it is autonomously independent for a practically, uh, you can't even count that those short periods of time.
Sorry.
Practically, they always find an object. But the third idea is that you can have psychological states, especially of people who have worked on themselves quite a bit, that you can have this pure cognition or pure affect or pure psychic activity for a reasonable period of time without an object, and
Hmm.
they can be observed as pure effects. And there we get an idea that pure effects can exist. That is one part. Corresponding to it, the state of no objects. So this is something that, as we said, the Kleinians won't agree and the Freudians will insist. So this is second. Now, when we come to the idea of inertia, it is something very important. First, borrowing from the idea of pure instinct,
Hmm.
the pure inertia can exist. This is the first important thing. Second important element is you can have or experience a state of complete inertia, which is psychologically seems complete, but of course biologically is not complete, or you would be dead. But in psychological sense, you can experience the state of pure inertia, just as you can experience the state of pure oceanic state without an object. And this state of pure inertia, like the state oceanic state of primary narcissism, also is object free. Third important element about this inertia entity is it's a strange kind of entity. Because if we look at uh, entities in therapy which are very important, most of them are hydraulic entities like sadness, anger, guilt. They are affect involving hydraulic entities. When we look at something like inferiority, it is an entity which is not strictly hydraulic, but it's a very important entity.
In that case, even grief.
Right. Grief is still a hydraulic entity in the sense the affect is involved.
In the primary stages.
You can do catharsis and you can release those things. Now, on one hand, you have these hydraulic entities of anger, sadness, guilt, grief. On the other hand, you have something like inferiority. And then you have shame somewhere in between. That at times it looks like a hydraulic entity, and at times in its very deep forms, you just feel like vanishing. And you don't feel shame in that hydraulic sense. So probably it goes on both the continuums. And then we have the state of inertia, which is as non-hydraulic as it can be. Because it is the cessation of the hydraulic activity which defines the beginning of this entity. So once we say that you are trying to remove all affect, all thought, and you go back into the state of inertia, then the movement to the state of inertia first is saying goodbye to the affective hydraulic activity, then the cognitive activity, and then you descend into inertia. So it is the second extreme of that is a pole, extreme pole of the non-hydraulic elements. And you have the hydraulic elements, and then you have some things in between. So it's one of the most non-hydraulic elements in its pure forms. So that is how we look at it, and what we see into it is how it gets infused into depression, into catatonia, into schizophrenia. And what are the difficulties? The difficulties are we should not confuse it. We should not confuse inertia with repression by bottled up anger. Like if you have an anger driven depression, in anger driven depression, you may not feel like doing anything, and one may feel it is inertia at work. But the causal element there is not inertia. The outward effect is seen as inertia. But in elemental causality, it's not inertia, it is bottled up anger. And when the anger is released, the man is back into activity. Similarly,
so there it is symptomatic, and other it is the root cause.
yeah,
There
right.
is a difference between these two.
So what
But
you see,
uh, doesn't that say that a person has a tendency to go that side?
see, behavioral
Only
inertia.
not everybody.
See, the behavioral inertia of depression is very different from the elemental inertia we are referring to. The
Right.
behavioral inertia may come out of uh, repressed anger, repressed sadness, repressed guilt, repressed hopelessness. It may just come
Or
out
isolation
of
of
stressor.
affect,
Sorry.
or the isolation of the effect itself.
So all of that can lead to uh, a misleading idea of inertia.
Inertia.
When we look at inertia in a behavioral sense, it's a misleading idea. So because there's lot of dynamism that anger wants to come up, and something is repressing the anger, and the whole thing is like a traffic jam. And this involves intense energy. There is intense dynamism in both equal and opposite direction, but it is held back. So here it's like a black hole. There is a huge amount of energy. It's not a vacuum. We are referring to that vacuum type of a pure inertia. So there we see that we have to be careful that we don't understand aggression-led, anger-led depression as caused by inertia, because it's highly
Inertia.
in sadness-related depression. There is a very strong element of inertia that has the desire to cease to exist. In intense sadness-related depression, in intense guilt-related depression, there can be both a hydraulic anger towards oneself of self-destruction and a secret desire to just go into inertia, annihilate one's existence so that there is no one to guilt apportion to. And similarly, we see in catatonia, there can be an intense repression of very high aggression. And that seems like inertia, but it is not actually inertia. In some cases, it may be inertia. Similarly, in case of addiction, in some addictive cases, we may see behavioral inertia, but a flight of fancy in the inner world, which is not actually inertia. But in some cases, we find inertia as the goal of the addiction. They just want to cease involvement in all activity and just go to the state of inertia so that you are free from all the hassles of dynamism, because dynamism is hassle inducing. There are a lot of hassles in dynamism.
Does that also mean that inertia? I'm yet to articulate where I'm reaching, so please help me to
Yeah,
put up
please
the
go.
question as well. Does that mean that inertia here, when we talk in the context of pure inertia, it is only driven by that instinct? What about the oceanic inertias?
Uh,
If I put it in more layman words, is there a positive inertia and a negative inertia?
yeah. So exact opposite of inertia will be samadhi.
Hmm.
So
But
when you
that is also inertia.
behaviorally,
Behave. No, when we go to the fundamentals of the existence,
so there it will be pure consciousness.
pure consciousness, not inconscious. Inconscious. You use the term. I am still not getting that.
Inconscient, pure inconscience.
Inconscious.
So it's opposite, exact opposite. It's like the entire existence is between these two poles,
Hmm.
pure consciousness and pure inertia.
Inertia.
And then there are grading sense of it. From pure consciousness, you come to slightly less conscient, less conscient, less conscient. Then you come to matter. I mean, you come to mind, you come to
Mind
body,
matter.
you come to matter. And below the matter, you go into pure inertia.
Hmm.
Right? So it's like the whole existence is between the two, conceptually speaking.
Conceptually. Yeah.
People, those who have gone into state of samadhi, they do it experientially also. That they have experienced both pure inertia and pure consciousness.
Hmm.
Now, behaviorally, outwardly, they may look the same. That a person in the state of samadhi is behaviorally looks inert. A person in the state of pure inertia also behaviorally looks inert. So, behaviorally, it's misleading to analyze this term.
Now, does that mean that inertia is always that instinct driven?
Uh, on the other hand, it is death instinct which is inertia driven. The
Makes
more
more sense.
fundamental thing is the call to come back to the state of inertia. It's
Right.
like at a very philosophical level, something is
Mm-hmm.
asking manifestation to come back. That why are you going to manifestation? Just come back into the state of inertia.
Hmm.
Because this whole manifestation, in a way, is an opposite of inertia.
So total absentism of dynamisms. There is no movement.
Right. It's like Purusha multiplied by -1. So you have Purusha, pure Purusha, Purusha multiplied by -1, and all the Prakriti and Purusha in between.
Between. So can we go into vicissitudes of inertia and pathology?
Yes. It The vicissitudes of inertia are many. You see that in depression, you see that in self-destruction of any pathology, self-destruction you see. You see it in addiction, you see it in catatonia, you see it in forms of withdrawal. You also see inertia as a refuge from the unbearable dynamism of living. You also see inertia in a healthy form as a point where one goes back to recuperate, recover, and rejuvenate oneself, which we do in sleep. We all get into inertia. Every sleep is lot of inertia. Every going into coma is lot of inertia. Every falling unconscious is lot of inertia. Then we
What
have,
about hibernation in animals? If any,
yeah, that's also a lot of inertia. Part of the system is experiencing the inertia. Then we have it in sadism and masochism. And the positive aspect of inertia, the sublimated equivalent is stability. The sublimated equivalent is stability, and the healthy optimization of inertia and dynamism is to optimize healthy uh, regimen of activity and rest. So when you do what is called work-life balancing, it's a very healthy optimization of consciousness and inertia, of dynamism and inertia. So we all need going back to inertia to rejuvenate, to recuperate ourselves. And if we don't, then we get into burnout. If we discount inertia, don't pay any attention to it, then we get into those burnout situations. Or it goes into psychosomatic difficulties. So it's very necessary to accept it as an important variable and optimize it, just as we optimize dynamism.
how often do we encounter inertia in therapy spaces as a therapist? And how do you deal with it in the therapy?
We encounter it very, very easily, and we deal with it in a variety of ways. The first is when we encounter it in the form of masochism of different types or disinterest in pleasure of different types. So the first is we release the taboos and set the person free to pursue their desires for pleasure. So first is taboo overcome. The second is to overcome the disappointment and anger and sadness put up inside and free the person by catharsis so that he is free from the inner load to generate desires of pleasure. Third is we overcome I am not good enough, I don't deserve pleasure, inferiority. Fourth, we try to overcome guilt that I have to suffer for what I have done, I don't deserve pleasure. So fourth is that. Fifth is uh, we bring inertia into discussion and how to optimize it. And that gives a lot of freedom to people when they realize that there is a pain in activity and a pleasure in inertia and it's addictive. Seventh, we look at 3 I's of inertia: inertia, indolence, and indulgence. Like somebody may be having severe addiction at the inertia stage. Somebody will just come out, but will be lazing around, what we call lazy bones. That is a state of indolence. It is not pure inertia. It is something above it. But he will be on his bed all day asking you to do everything for him. And then just above it is indulgence. That he not only asks you to do everything for him, he demands variety. And that often goes along with addiction. So inertia, indolence, and indulgence, the 3 I's, one of the worst forms of laziness and addiction that we try to explore and overcome where we can. Then we try to overcome the fragmentation anxiety because often you go to inertia as a defense against fragmentation anxiety. That the centrifugal forces of energy are seen too many. And there is a fear of fragmentation. So many people avoid the fear of fragmentation by either using rage or by going into some form of sadness or depression, mild depression, or going into inertia, or drowning down oneself in some drug which actually reduces the energy.
Oh, with this, I'm reminded of one of the cases where this young boy who's been into deep therapy from last 4 5 years, and he was reaching the core of the root causality of whatever issues he was facing. And somewhere there was this fear of fragmentation. You
Right.
know, first the core was there, and immediately he switched to one of the meditative techniques. He went for vipassana,
Very
and as I dreaded, no, now there is total inertia there. He says there is no need to get motivated. There is no, motivation to do anything. He feels very thoughtless, uncertain. There is a part of it where there's a shift of dimension in his existence itself, but there is a lot of inertia because of he was about to reach, and there was an unconscious need to fix it in some other way. And Vipassana, while it's a beautiful form of, getting into deeper aspects, but
right. So one thing we have to avoid is capture by inertia, because if one is enslaved by inertia, it's very difficult to get out. So this is something which is very important. And then some people use it as a refuge, and we have to be careful that what I call affinity or darkness of repressed affect, that
hmm,
is misinterpreted as inertia. Lastly, it also offers as a refuge and an anchor. And many people seek uh, inertia as a temporary anchor on their spiritual path. That when difficulties arise too much, they partly regress to primary narcissism and partly they regress into inertia. And these are what they call on the spiritual path the day and night of yoga. So the night of yoga often is suffering and often can be inertia. So it's
uh,
also element in the spiritual path. Huh, you're saying something.
when it is an element in a spiritual path, I just wanted to recheck because many times it's not it's for many it's unconscious. Many times I have picked up this path consciously that it is getting too much now. So as an anchor, when it is consciously chosen, still it is inertia or it is just a resting phase.
It's a resting phase.
Okay.
It's a resting. Few
Okay.
people will actually be able to consciously enter inertia, one of the most difficult places to enter. Like if you want to read more on it, Sri Aurobindo's poetry, Savitri, the longest poem in English literature, that has a chapter. It's called The Book of Traveler of the Worlds.
Okay.
And in that, one of the travels will be in the world of the inconscient. So that is actually a travelogue of somebody who has traveled extensively in that area. Psychically speaking, of course. I mean, you don't take a train ticket to inertia. It's the inner world. So that way,
But being aware of it and choosing it and then taking a rest there and then something changes in you and then again you start off. It's a conscious choice
in
for
fact,
the spiritual practitioners.
so in Sri Aurobindo's path, uh, this is one of the must go places. Like when you're working on something inside of you, often the roots are in the physical nature, which is near to the plane of inertia, not very near, but still near to the plane of inertia. And one has to work on the physical mind to extricate the roots of what you are trying to solve. That's specific to that particular path. But in that way, it's a very important element in spirituality. People deal with it in different ways. Different schools deal with it in different ways.
Sometimes even that state resolves many things on its own. You don't have to do anything.
Correct.
That it's when it's a very aware when once you're very aware and you're choosing to go in that inertia valley stage, And then once you come out of it, things are, they have already paced ahead, things have resolved, you have done nothing about it. So,
Correct. True. It's true.
um, it brings us to spirituality again. How does it factor inertia in its framework?
It is central actually, especially to the Hindu schools of philosophy. It is central because they always talk of tamas, rajas, sattva, and the state of enlightenment. And the heart of tamas is inertia. So if tamas is a sphere, the center of the sphere is inertia. So it's very, very important. So when the moment you talk of tamas,
Hmm.
the center of the tamas, the soul of the tamas is inertia. And the other elements of that sphere of tamas are what we said, the three I's: inertia,
Hmm.
indolence, and indulgence. And the fourth element is something which is uh, abominable, what in Natya Shastra we will call anything that induces bibhatsaras. That forms the tamas.
I didn't get what it means.
Uh, Something
Anything?
obnoxious.
Okay.
I'm not referring to something sexually vulgar, not that element,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
something obnoxious, something gruesome, something very dirty, something loathsome.
Hmm.
So something dirty, something loathsome, something gruesome, something cruel,
Hmm.
something brutal,
Hmm.
all that you can loathe, that becomes that bibhatsaras.
Okay. The term is
Bibhatsa, Bithatsa,
beta. Okay.
bibhatsa. So when you talk of the rasas,
Huh.
Shringar rasa, Hasya ras, Veer ras, in that line, one of the ras, the most abominable, the kind of agora ras, so to say,
Hmm. Okay.
is the bibhatsa ras.
Okay.
So yeah, so I was coming to this. Uh, they put it centrally, tamas, as a very important element, and they talk in terms of the spiritual equivalent of inertia, which is stability, and they talk of purush and prakriti, and this is like uh, pure anti-purusha.
Hmm.
It's purusha multiplied by -1, the pure inertia. And what we see there is different schools deal with it differently. Let's say I have some examples. In Sri Aurobindo's path, when you go deeper into this area of inertia, the visualization that comes is of basalt rock. So when the igneous rocks
The
are
wish.
formed out of lava, one of the strongest form is basalt rock. You
Hmm.
just Google it and you can see image
Hmm.
of basalt rock.
Hmm.
So that visualization comes up automatically, which means in Sri Aurobindo's school, the sadhana has reached the physical.
Hmm.
So you start with the mental, go to the vital, and you go to the physical. As it deepens, the visuals of basalt rock come in, which means you are somewhere, you have entered the kingdom of inertia. And then the second visualization is of meeting the king of the kingdom of inertia. That is like a super Yamaraj. Some people even call it uh, Rudra Mahadev
So they get visuals
visuals.
without any reference prior.
Yeah. And that is very archetypal. These
Yeah.
visuals are very archetypal.
Yeah.
Like Jung says, that often transformation starts in the unconscious much before we know, and the messages of that transformation come up as visuals rather than as words. So this is one school. The second tantric school deals with it by looking at the root chakra as dealing with inertia. And if you go deeper, then both the Tantra and Sri Aurobindo, they postulate one chakra which is about 1 or 2 feet below the legs, outside of the body. Just as Sahasra chakra is above the head, there is one below the leg, which is actually the center of inconscience, the inertia.
Mm-hmm.
So they postulate it that way.
Okay.
And what they do is very few people directly go there. They start with the root chakra and you have worship of Lord Ganesha to overcome tamas and inertia. And only after the root chakra is healed of tamas, of inertia, of fear of survival, of aggression towards other, that you go to higher chakras. So in that sense, it's a part of the fundamental practice in Tantra.
Does that mean the person who's dead will go that chakra will life force will go in that chakra?
It depends upon how you conceptualize it, but what we will say,
If we stick to this aspect,
uh,
what we are discussing right now,
so the within this framework, the idea will be that the life energy will collapse into inertia,
into it.
into that chakra, and then from there it will go to somewhere else. But the moment it collapses, we say death happens. So what would mean is the moment the soul leaves the body, the energy will collapse into the inertia chakra.
Into it. Yeah.
Some people,
Maybe when it is not even a chakra.
yeah, some people conceptualize it differently. They say the energy leaves from many chakras. And what happens is the last form of it remains with the inertia and then gets absorbed by the inertia wala chakra. There's slightly different conceptualization.
Seems like a black hole.
Right.
Seems
It is that.
we visualize it's like a black hole.
It is that. Because in the individual, it looks like an individual black hole. And when you look at it philosophically, it is like the most fundamental black hole of the universe,
Universe.
into which everything will collapse ultimately. And from which again the evolution will start. So this is like the pole of involution, that everything, the pure consciousness goes completely there, then from it again rises. And this involution, evolution game goes on. That's one idea in the philosophical area.
Mm.
Yeah, I was talking about it. So there is this idea of Mahadev and the Rudra Mahadev. So that visually that,
Archetypes.
yeah, that king of that inertia kingdom is Rudra Mahadev. Some people call it Mahayamaraj, because this is like not only death, this is like a super death. So there the idea is from uh, and there are two ideas. One is uh, in spirituality, that when pralay happens, there are two words actually, pralay and mahapralay. So when
Ji.
pralay happens, the Mahadev does the destruction activity by Tandav, and everything is destroyed. But when it's recreated, the fundamental laws are still the same.
Mm.
It's a pralay, that you have destruction and you have recreation. So, but the fundamental laws are the same of the newly created world. But there is a Mahapralay when the destruction is so total that the new created world will have fundamentally different laws of
Different
physics,
laws.
chemistry, everything. And that is called Mahapralay. And the idea there is that before the Mahapralay, the Tandav is done not by Mahadev but by Rudra Mahadev, the king of inertia.
Okay. Oh.
So those are the ideas. And the idea is then from the whole cosmic game is explained as a journey from pure consciousness to pure inertia back to pure consciousness. That is the whole philosophical aspect. So we see that in philosophy, in spirituality, in psychoanalysis, it is quite at the center of very important phenomena. Unfortunately, it has not got the attention and the theorizing it should have gone. In practice, also, very few people are aware of it, and even fewer would use it.
Inertia and discussion is a joyful movement. Hope you all enjoy and like to explore it further. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.